first of all, let me just say thank you very much for having me. I've not been to a Tech Nottingham event before. I've met some of the folks who are involved, but I've not been to an event before. So thank you for inviting me. Thank you especially to Louise for inviting / telling me that I had to come and do a talk. So I'm very grateful to be here. I realized that my talk title is a little bit vague. It's because I had this great idea that I wanted to tell a story, and I thought I'd make all my slides out of Lego, which seemed like a good idea at the time. And then when I came to it, I realized that my title didn't really tell anyone what my talk was about. So let me try to describe what my talk is about. Basically, what I'm going to be doing is sharing a story about what happened to me in 2019, where I got promoted, which was very exciting. Then I realized that I'd taken on quite a lot and had a bit of a panic. And so then I was lucky enough to get some advice, which I found quite helpful. So what I want to do is share that advice so that it might help some of you. It's advice around how to balance workload, sort of how to scale yourself, and also how to try to take on additional leadership responsibilities. I can't say honestly that I've been able to follow all of the advice, but hopefully if I share it with you all, you will gain something from it. And I'm really excited at the end to hopefully, if we can have a discussion in the Q&A section, to see if other folks here have other advice about how to handle kind of huge amounts of workload or taking on leadership responsibilities. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. Who am I? Well, my name is Paula Kennedy. I actually, at the start of this year, so about, where are we now? A couple of months ago, left my previous role. So I was working at VMware. My role was Senior Director of Global Education within the Tanzu team, which is kind of modern applications. And I recently left that role to take a break and to focus on homeschooling. And as we talked about at the start of this session, thankfully the kids went back to school today, which was very exciting. So for anyone who's been in the same boat as me for the last few months and trying to juggle homeschooling, congratulations on surviving it. Let's just hope that the kids stay in school and don't go back into lockdown at any point soon. But anyway, my talk is about what happened to me last year when I was employed actually at Pivotal. So VMware acquired Pivotal, for folks that don't know. And the story is around about what happened when I was working at Pivotal. So what's the story? Once upon a time, I was the director of a team called the Platform Services team at Pivotal. Basically, our job was to help customers to install and run the Pivotal application platform, which has been through a few different names: Cloud Foundry, Pivotal Platform, Tanzu Application Service. The customers bought our platform. My team's responsibility was help customers to install and run it. So that was my job. I had a team of around 25 people, and it was good. It was a lot of fun. We were growing. We were trying out different experiments with how to kind of implement the software, how to work with customers, and we were actually having a lot of fun. And I did that role for around about 3 years and loved it, having a great old time. I was lucky to build a really good team, an amazing team of humans, and we had a really strong leadership team and generally had a lot of fun. Then after 3 years of doing that role, I realized that I'd built such an amazing team that they didn't need me as much as they did in the early days, let's say, which I think is a good sign. I think it's always good to try to make yourself redundant, but I realized that I wasn't quite as necessary as I previously had been. So I was trying to push myself to take on extra responsibility. So essentially, I looked around within Pivotal and the different business units and tried to find somewhere where I thought I could maybe add value or help. And I looked at the education team in EMEA and essentially figured I could probably help them. They were a very, very small team. So that took some effort, some meetings, some serious kind of convincing and negotiating with my leadership to basically try to get the job, honestly. But after quite a lot of discussion, I got the job, which was very exciting. So I was promoted to senior director, and I was asked to take over a second team, essentially. So I was running the platform services team and, in addition, running the education team, which was amazing. It was exactly what I asked for. I was very excited. There was lots of wine and ice cream. You can see by my amazing Lego construction, but it was great. It was exactly what I asked for. The problem was that once the celebrations ended and the hangover cleared up, I was suddenly a bit shocked as when I realized I had twice as much work to do, because now I was trying to lead two teams. Admittedly, the education team was very small, but it was a whole team with its own culture and its own practices and its own workload. So this is what my panic face looked like. And I was not quite sure how I was going to manage, honestly. But luckily for me, Pivotal had given me a leadership coach, an external coach that Pivotal paid for me to talk to. And so when I was panicking, that's what I did. So I spoke to my leadership coach. My leadership coach looks nothing like Ned Flanders. It just so happened that that was the Lego piece I had to represent him. But my leadership coach was a very wise, very kind man called Malcolm, who was very patient with me and gave me some good advice. And actually, what's been interesting is this advice was, like I said, probably early 2019, and it's been helpful. It was helpful then, and it's continued to be helpful. So I have actually tried to keep it in mind as I've gone through lockdown and after even like leaving my job. It's been quite useful to me. So I'm going to just explain to you. There's basically two key pieces of advice. The first piece of advice is what Malcolm called the 5 Ds. So I'm going to take you through what the 5 Ds are. The first D, delete it. So this is really when you're trying to manage this huge amount of workload. So I was facing my day job with the platform services team, plus this influx of emails and requests and just information overload from taking on the second team. And so the first D, delete it. Basically, there's only so many hours in the day, and what he recommended was trying to, wherever possible, eliminate things that aren't necessary. So that could be things like recurring meetings. A really great exercise I found was to look through my calendar. I mean, you probably all are facing the same thing. It feels like it's even worse, been worse in lockdown. But when you look at your calendar and it's just back to back to back meetings, and you might find yourself in the trap where there's recurring meetings that happen, and they happen because they've always happened. And there may be a hygiene activity that you can go through to say, is this actually a useful meeting? So some good questions that I've kind of been putting to myself in the last few months have been, is there an agenda for this meeting? Is it clear what we're going to be talking about? Is there an expected outcome? If I attend this meeting, what do I expect to get out of it? And my favorite one, could this meeting be an email? Because it feels like there's many meetings that could probably be better served as being emails. Also the frequency. So where I was trying to do, one-to-ones every single week, could some of those one-to-ones be every 2 weeks, for example? Just trying to free up your calendar to give you a little bit more time to juggle more things. I found this really, really hard, I have to say. I like talking to people. It's where I get my energy from. I think I'm a bit of an extrovert. And so for me to try and go through my calendar and actually cancel meetings was hard, but necessary, absolutely necessary to clear some space to get things done. And I also personally suffer quite badly with fear of missing out, FOMO. And I'm always like, oh, I don't want to miss that meeting just in case. What if something happens that's really important? So this was a hard one for me to actually follow this advice, but just being able to clear out a few things freed up my space to be able to get some things done. Taking on additional voluntary tasks is another thing something I do a lot. Let's put it that way. As you might have guessed from my introduction, I actually actively sought this opportunity to take on more work. And I do like to take on lots of things. I think for me personally, partly that is, I like to challenge myself. Partly I have imposter syndrome, and I always think, am I being useful? Do people think I'm being useful? Maybe I should do some extra things to show how useful I am, which is a thing that I suffer from quite a lot. But I know myself that taking on too much just means I'm going to mess something up. Like if I'm trying to spin all the things, something's going to drop. And I know that. So I have to try to remind myself of that. I think if you are in a situation where you're tempted to take on extra work, try to be intentional about it. One thing that I have seen, and it's kind of common, I guess, is many sort of underrepresented folks tend to take on that extra work around diversity and inclusion and trying to advocate for underrepresented folks and for rights. And that's an extra burden, which is really important. I mean, really, really important. At the same time, though, if you're trying to do extra work to maybe get promoted or be more visible, I think it's worth making sure that you are doing the things that are going to get you the outcome that you want. Like I say, if you want to get promoted, but actually the promotions tend to go to the folks that aren't doing any extra work, then ask yourself if you're doing that heavy lifting for, you know, the outcome that you want to achieve. I mean, I've done, many different things over the years, and lots of them are just because I care passionately about them and I'm going to do them regardless. And I think that's fine. But also just, I have to remind myself that sometimes I don't need to take on all the extra things. Um, I don't know about you folks. I'm really bad with email. I tend to read every single email. I don't use filters. I treat my inbox as my to-do list, and it governs my life. So this one was hard for me, and I still haven't really gotten the hang of using email filters, honestly. But one tactic I have tried to do is reduce the amount of time I spend looking at my inbox. Restrict myself. So maybe I'll do like an hour in the morning, an hour after lunch, and then try not to be always checking all the emails all the time to see what's happening. I don't use filters, but I have tried in the past to sort my inbox into at least to do now, to do later. And then if the to do later waits long enough, it tends to disappear a little bit. And the best advice I've heard, which I struggle with again, is it's okay to say no. People tend to ask me to do things, and my instinct is always to say yes. And I still do it. I mean, I still do it, even though I know there's advice. But what I'm at least trying to do these days is not say yes immediately, even if I'm probably going to say yes anyway, but at least give myself a little pause to think about it, to actually weigh it up as to if I'm going to do the thing or not. And so I think even if you know you're probably going to end up doing it anyway, just try to give yourself a little pause, a little breath to think about it. So the second D, delay it. This is my Lego of me lounging, lounging around, relaxing. By delaying it, it basically is about trying to prioritize and not trying to do everything all at the same time. So prioritization is critical. However you prioritize, and there's lots of ways, whether something's important versus urgent, there's like tactics that you can use to prioritize. But if your to-do list has got, 100 things on it and they're all urgent, that means nothing's urgent. So you have to try to prioritize, and you may get, 2 things done or 10 things done, but just trying to make sure that the things that you're doing are intentionally the things that you know are the right things to be doing. That means you're doing the right things. Deadlines can be negotiated. There's a funny meme where it's like deadlines can be seen by the sound of them whooshing past. Like it's a funny thing. I don't know. Deadlines, sometimes they're really, really important, and sometimes they're completely arbitrary. And I think it's important to know the difference. If someone sets you a deadline, understand if it's real or not. And if you can't achieve it, if you look at it and think there's no way I can do that without absolutely working 24 hours a day, then negotiate. Work out what happens if you miss that deadline, and then see if it can be negotiated. Taking breaks is a weird sort of counterintuitive piece of advice, but it can help. For me, if I'm stressed out or panicking about the amount of things I've got to do, I've got so many things to do, I don't know how I'm going to get them all done, I tend to get into a spiral of panic mode, which means I spend more energy and time stressing out about all the things I've got to do than actually doing the things, which makes my time even more wasted by not doing the actual things. And so even though it sounds counterintuitive, by taking a break, even just a short break, so maybe it's like step away from the computer to make a cup of tea, or step outside to get some fresh air, or like deliberately not eating lunch at the desk can actually help you to refocus and actually gain a sense of control over your time. I mean, I think in lockdown times, we're now all feeling like Zoom fatigue. We're always at the desk. It's hard to separate work from life because like work is in our home. So it makes this even more important, actually, I think, to just try to give yourself even just 5 or 10 minutes to like take a break, reset, and allow your sense of control to come back. And then finally, not everything is urgent. This is one of my favorite pieces of advice. If somebody tells you something is urgent, that means it's urgent for them. It doesn't mean it's urgent for you. I don't. I've many stories of working with kind of enterprise salespeople for whom everything is urgent for that customer, but it might not be urgent for you. And so I think it's just sometimes worth taking that with a pinch of salt. If someone tells you it's urgent, just have a little think about if it's actually urgent. Okay, D number 3, delegate it. Any similarities to these folks looking like my past team is complete coincidence. So delegation, it's, again, it's really easy for me to share this advice that Malcolm gave me. It was quite hard for me to follow it and still is. I am a massive control freak. I really struggle with delegation. But if you're like me and you've ever had that sense of, well, it would take so long to explain it, I might as well just do it myself. That's the attitude that just doesn't scale. Unless you figure out a way to clone yourself, then you literally cannot do everything yourself. And so delegation is really is really the way to do things. I was really lucky at Pivotal to have a team that I trusted who could do things. And, you know, it got to the point where some of the folks would just get on and do things and tell me afterwards because we had a really strong kind of relationship. It's been interesting for me recently to try to apply this same principle to my children when they're doing their homeschooling, and I've been trying to do all the things with them because I just want to help them, but actually realizing that just backing away and letting them do some things on their own is really important. It's helpful for them. I mean, I have this weird feeling of guilt where if I'm delegating work, does that mean I'm just passing everything to other people to do and I'm not doing my job? But I have to reframe this is actually succession planning. It's giving your team the opportunity so that they're ready to step into a leadership role. You don't want to end up in a situation where you have to do everything and nobody else is ever going to learn. And so therefore they themselves can't be promoted. If you're lucky enough to lead a team, then this is your opportunity to help your team members grow into team leaders. So I try to reframe that like guilt of like, oh my goodness, I'm just passing everything off, to actually trying to help the team to grow. The next D, this is the worst one, is just do it. Sometimes you actually have to just do the thing. So you've worked out it needs to be done. You're the person to do it. It just has to be done. But at least try to time box it. I do have a habit of thinking, oh, I'll just, write some slides for presentation. And then 6 hours later, I'm still there nitpicking away at the format or how I want it to look. That's also not a way of being able to juggle multiple things. So try if you can. Like I say, easy for me to share this advice, but try to sort of time box things just a little bit. One way I found that helps with that actually is the final D, which is diminish it. Which is basically around, this is the smallest possible Lego piece I could find, if you wonder what the Lego image is. It's the smallest little piece I could find. But diminishing it is basically trying to just do enough, essentially. Before you start a task, understand or set yourself a clear intention of what does done look like. You don't need to go and keep going and keep going and keep going. Understand what done looks like, and then get to that point and then stop. Right? Set yourself out an intention that you know what you're going to achieve and then achieve that. Reduce repetitive tasks. This is interesting, trying to apply some kind of other practices to workload management. So in site reliability engineering, there's a principle around reducing toil and automating tasks where possible. So thinking about how you can apply that principle to your workload or your life load. It could be something as simple as there's a weekly status email that has to be sent out. Can you automate it? Instead of manually having to type something, is there a way that you can automate it to just reduce the repetitive nature of some of the things that just have to get done? And not everything has to be perfect. I mean, again, I'm also a massive perfectionist and I find this one quite hard, but things don't have to be perfect. There's another principle which you can try to apply, which is, the sort of the minimum viable principle. Like minimum viable product is something just good enough to get feedback on. So trying to do that with your work. Like if you've got to send out a presentation or a report, or you've got to do some analysis, my typical response is to really give 100% or 110% or go the extra mile or do every single possible thing to make it perfect. And that's also not really scalable. You need to, or at least I need to try to just do good enough, which isn't to say do a shoddy job, but it's just do good enough. Don't try and go the extra mile. Just do enough that the task is done. So that's the 5 Ds. But Malcolm had one other piece of advice for me, which I will share as well. And it was this. When I was promoted, Malcolm asked me the question, which is basically, are you on the bridge or are you in the engine room? And really the question is around, if you've been in a team and you've been promoted to lead a team, it's quite interesting where your comfort zone is probably doing all the things that the team has been doing. And when you get promoted to lead that team, it's easy to revert back into your comfort zone and keep doing the actual activities. But if you're doing the activities and you're in the engine room, then who is steering the ship? Because in a leadership role, your role is more around looking. Malcolm described it like being on the deck of a boat and you're looking around. And if you're on the bridge, you're looking out for, the icebergs and you're steering the course and you're like plotting how the things have to happen. And if you're not doing that because you're in the engine room working away trying to get the stuff done, which might mean you're out on a customer site or you're helping debug a situation or you're doing some other thing that is really just kind of the engineering work, then you are not leading the team. You're not on the bridge. You're not steering the direction or looking out for those icebergs. It's a question I try to think about often. It's interesting because it's really hard when you're used to doing the work and it's tangible and you can see it. And then when you go into a leadership role and your feedback loop is much slower and you can't quite see the results of the things that you've done. And then it's really tempting to go back and be like, well, I'm just going to go and do that task. I'm just going to go and, write that slide deck, or I'm just going to go and do that thing, because you can see some tangible work. But it's just a good question that, like I said, Malcolm asked me to bear in mind, and I tried to. So to summarize, those were the pieces of advice that Malcolm gave me. Did I succeed in following them always? Absolutely not. Did I follow some of them some of the time? Yes, I tried to. One thing I actually ended up doing was writing the 5 Ds on a Post-it note and sticking it on my monitor so I could actively remind myself, especially on those days when the inbox was, 300 emails that unread and I had other things going on. And I was like, I really am just struggling. Going through those 5 Ds and saying them out loud to myself and trying to apply them helped me just a little bit. So with that, I would like to say thank you very much. Thank you for listening. I'd like to give a quick shout out to my kids who lent me their Lego and helped me make the slides. I am, like I said at the start, I'd really love to hear how other people have handled, workload, trying to juggle things in lockdown, which has been tough for everybody, or other tips and advice for leadership or how to handle being promoted. Thank you.